The NES, the iconic video game console that took America by storm. But what if I was to tell you that prior to this legendary system's success, Nintendo had not only designed a different console to help break America, but even physically made such a device too. So, with all this said, join me today as we discuss this largely forgotten chapter in gaming history. I am Lady Decade, and this is the insane story of the mysterious Nintendo Advanced Video Game System. At this point, Nintendo's legacy spans well over 100 years, with their repertoire ranging from selling playing cards, running love hotels, shifting simple toy gadgets, and a passing interest in arcade machines. But for many, Nintendo only truly became the big N we all know and love, or tolerate if you were on the Sega side of the divide in the console wars, when they broke into the console market. Releasing their first home console, the Color TV Game 6, their first foray into the home hardware market was far from spectacular. Positioning themselves to sell a rudimentary device, the Color TV Game 6 could only play 6 very basic built-in games. In this era, Nintendo was clearly ill-prepared to compete with the likes of the Atari Video Computer System, later rebranded the Atari 2600, released the same year. Thriving on its interchangeable cartridges, Atari would quickly become the dominant force in the Americas when it came to home gaming. Nintendo, on the other hand, would soon make substantial strides into a market they largely dominate to this day, portable gaming, with the introduction of the Game & Watch line of handheld devices. These little wonders began seeing releases in 1980. They would eventually be the home of the iconic Nintendo directional pad and a preview of a dual-screen device that would ultimately become one of their biggest hits, the Nintendo DS. Moving on to July 1983, Nintendo would take the plunge and use the information they learned from the past 6 years. They would take the concept of a home console, something they had experience with, controllers with directional pads, and what they pioneered with the Game & Watch and interchangeable cartridges, something the Fairchild Channel F invented but Atari's 2600 would fully embrace, and combine them into a new device. The family computer, often shorthanded into Famicom, much like they would later shorthand Pocket Monsters into Pokemon, would be Nintendo's big gamble. Adapting a few of their arcade hits like Donkey Kong and Popeye, alongside original titles like Super Mario Bros., the Famicom would allow an array of colourful cartridges to be plugged into the diminutive device. While this cute device would go down well in the marketplace, it would have a few problems, notably spongy square buttons that would eventually become the circular icons they were known for. There were their short controller cables, which might have made sense for compact Japanese households, but not spacious American living rooms, and most destructively, a hardware defect that would see the company recalling and replacing all sold devices, much like how Microsoft would later experience with the infamous Red Ring of Death for the Xbox 360. As covered on this channel in the past, when it came to conquering America, Nintendo would consider a relationship with Atari to release the device under their branding, but would ultimately decide to approach a number of these problems firsthand with a full console redesign. This redesign was presumably predicated by 2 significant issues. Firstly, what works for Japan doesn't necessarily work for the United States, which was already struggling with issues in the game market, and secondly, what they've learned from the Famicom's existing design and how to improve on the core hardware. This curious revision of the Famicom would be revealed at the Winter Consumer Electronics Show in Las Vegas in January 1984. While the device was reportedly on hand, you have to remember that this was 1984. Nintendo was effectively a non-entity in the home console market in the West, and the gaming press world was barely getting off the ground as of yet. There were no known video or hands-on write-ups. Still, thankfully, the Video Game History Foundation found a copy of a brochure being handed out at the event, providing us with physical proof that this largely overlooked event really did happen. Fortunately, thanks to this wonderful lost relic shows us a world that could have been. On the cover, Nintendo would simply state, The evolution of the species is now complete, with it featuring 3 television sets. On the top is a TV with a 1976 label, clearly displaying a game of Pong. On the left is a 1981 display showing what looks to be Atari's attempt at tennis, and on the right, draped in red cloth, is a TV labelled for 1985. What a bunch of teasers! Come January 1984, Nintendo was already planning a significant debut in the following year. Inside the brochure, the first page would show a smattering of accessories. Most of these will be explored later, but of note is a keyboard and a tape deck accessory not seen later in the document. This was likely repurposing of the Famicom data recorder, which would only be useful for a handful of titles and would easily be supplanted by the Famicom disk system and the Family Basic keyboard, a Famicom stylized keyboard decades before the 8-bit DOE would introduce the same. Both of these devices would address or outright confirm that Nintendo of America would be interested in bringing the basic coding language that saw some success in Japan to the United States. Those who were heavily into gaming in Europe at the time on platforms like the ZX Spectrum had become accustomed to coding in BASIC, with in some instances even children creating their own games. The ability to program your own games on a game console would be an aggressive avenue that American game consoles never really pursued at the time, introducing an interesting element that sadly the NES would later fail to include. Rather flowery text on the page elaborates on the evolution theme, with the brochure highlighting the turmoil that by that point the American industry was in after the so-called crash of 1983. It states that over 100 years ago, Charles Darwin showed that in the animal kingdom, survival went hand in hand with evolution, and that in a changing world, only those able to adapt could thrive. The same is true in the home video entertainment business. In the last few years, people have become tired of home video games. They've been bored by stick figure graphics and unchallenging play, frustrated by unsightly design and a rat's nest of wires, and more than a little annoyed by games whose packaging is more exciting than their performance. Which is why many think it will take a miracle to keep this species from extinction. We disagree. All it will take is the Nintendo Advanced Video System. It's the first system that's delivered on the promise of exciting graphics with images that actually appear three-dimensional. It's the first system designed to fit in with other fine audio and video components. It's the first system that allows play of music as well as games. It's the first system that's more than a toy. All of which makes it the first home video entertainment system that's really worth buying. Lofty talk from a company that would soon actually pivot to marketing the console as a toy, complete with a bespoke robotic operating body to help sell such a lie, but I digress. Moving on, the next page highlighted the wireless controllers. That's right, wireless controllers. They would do this by showing one with the number 1 on the left-hand side. Beyond using the player-specific branding of the Famicom, Player 1 had the start and select buttons, Player 2 had the microphone, and the menu buttons were moved above the square B and A buttons and away from the now square D-pad. They would justify all of this by adding, "We worked very hard to make sure this picture would be missing something. A maze of wires. Because we've always felt tangled wires and cords got in the way of enjoying home video entertainment. So we replaced them with infrared controllers that allow you the same freedom of movement as a TV remote controller. We also make lots of other wireless peripherals for the advanced video system, like a joystick, a combination light, wand and gun, a data recorder, even a keyboard. In fact, the only wires you'll find are the 2 cords that plug into the cartridge controller, into the wall and into your television." Right, let's break down that pitch a bit. Infrared controllers could be hit or miss, but an infrared data recorder, that's going to have been prone to error. The gun peripheral, well, they would eventually distance themselves from actual weaponry, and to call the zapper a wand? The long stick on the previous page indicates it would be transformative. If anything, hearing the control deck being called the cartridge controller is just odd. The following 2-page spread would show off more of what we would actually know Nintendo to release. Mentioning a few different titles, it's easy to see how Advanced Video Golf and Advanced Video Baseball would become, well, golf and baseball. Tennis was simply named Tennis at the time, not Advanced Video Tennis. Donkey Kong Jr. Math and Excite Bike would find release, but Nintendo 500 car racing pictured on the lower right screen would not. The second page would highlight the cordless wand/gun, which, given that there's a game now called Wizards with a Gun, it seems Nintendo might have been decades ahead of the gaming scene. While it talks about westerns, cops and robbers and skeet shooting, it shows a classic and iconic image of a duck being shot in Duck Hunt. Following this is a page that highlights the basic programming skills we talked about earlier, despite not even showing the keyboard. What it does show is a joystick device, a wireless gamepad that may have made more sense for Atari 2600 players, and a game of Excite Bike which would have presumably taken advantage of the data recorder. Excite Bike was an example of the edit games, which let you modify levels, enemies and more, something that could have been done in Japan with the equivalent of Famicom accessory. The second option would be the basic cartridge, which would have come with 3 pre-programmed games. As good of a time as any, all the pictures of the Nintendo AVS featured a purple Famicom cartridge jutting out of the top. It's not hard to imagine Nintendo sticking with the default Famicom cartridge shape at the time, but years later would show that Nintendo of America loved to change up American cartridge designs for the NES and Super NES, and even slightly for the Nintendo 64 too, all to prevent international piracy. It wouldn't be hard to assume that the purple cartridge was actually Tennis, stripped of its labelling. Infamously, Nintendo's desire for larger grey cartridges for the Western market to evoke then high-spec video cassettes would lead to the front-loading control deck that would invariably cause bent pins, leading to the infamous mindset of blowing in the cartridge to attempt a better connection. Presumably with the basic or any other non-standard cartridge such as the Famicom Disk System, the console would have to have carts go taller or wider. The following page shows a music programming application which Nintendo would eventually get in a fashion with the Miracle Piano teaching system. Still, Nintendo themselves wouldn't build a musical keyboard in-house until the Nintendo Labo experiment. Well, I mean, kids built them, not Nintendo, and not in a sweatshop kind of way. Remember the Labo? Nintendo sold you cardboard, and then you had to put the cardboard together.
You don't have to give a donation for that, do we?
Well, don't say it like that.
Once Nintendo's full pitch for a world we would never see concludes, they teased that 90% of the Japanese market had signed up for the Famicom without actually naming the system. Given that their biggest challenger, the SG-1000, released on the same day, it's not like there was a massive user base of Atari, ColecoVision or Intellivision users to displace. The brochure adds with regards to Nintendo that, for over 95 years it has been a leader in entertainment, and today it is Japan's #1 company in the electronic game and coin-op industry. The main reason for our success has been a commitment to creating games that are innovative, challenging and of the highest quality. It's a tradition of excellence that continues with the Nintendo Advanced Video System, a proven product made even better for introduction to the American market. So welcome to the future of American home video entertainment. Welcome to Nintendo of America. As we now know, Nintendo would actually dominate the generation in the United States, but with the Nintendo Entertainment System complete with corded controllers, no programming capabilities, a front-loading design, and a non-transforming zapper, January 1984 is a long time away from October 1985, and the system saw a full redesign in that time frame, with this device going back into the archives. Interestingly, Nintendo wouldn't hide the existence of the device, much like prototype designs for the Super Nintendo. Still, it would pull the device out for display at the Nintendo World Store, and Nintendo Spain would share an image reminiscent of the first page, but with the NES and the Wii teasing the next generation of gaming, the Nintendo Switch. So there you have it, that was the story of the Nintendo Advanced Video Game System. So if you enjoyed this episode, check out my other videos on lost hardware now.